Okay, hopefully everybody can see me well. My name is Kent. I usually don't make videos about Nebraska football, but this is my third video. I'd like to talk a little bit about the game today. Actually, the Wisconsin game, which didn't turn out so well. And of course, the game last week, Michigan, which didn't turn out well at all. I grew up in the 1960s in western Nebraska, the western half of the state. In the 70s and 80s, I went to school in Nebraska. And of course, the 90s, when I was a young man traveling around, people would hear that I was from Nebraska, and of course the first thing they would say, "Oh, you're a Cornhusker." And they would start talking to me about Nebraska football, which is always kind of fun for me to have people recognize the fact I was from Nebraska and that they talk about Nebraska football. So I thought that was kind of fun. Of course, that was over 20 years ago. We live in California now, and even though I haven't had anyone say anything to me about Nebraska football, I still watch the football games, and I still am interested in the team and interested in what's going on, because it's kind of interesting. Because it's been a series of horrible mistakes that have led to what's happened this year and last year and the previous years. So Nebraska football really is not what it used to be, as most people should know. They've been around for any time. So the one thing that you saw today is you saw what ails Nebraska, which is the offensive line. And that's really too bad, because if there's one thing that Nebraska should be able to recruit within state, which it should be an offensive lineman. So the fact they don't have offensive linemen just shows you how bad the recruiting's been for the last 4 or 5 years under Scott Frost. And obviously Scott Frost could not recruit, did not recruit, and that's why they have a problem. It's not Micky Joseph's problem, it's Scott Frost's problem. And not only can he recruit, he was overpaid, I think $5 million a year, $25 million for the last 5 years. And of course they had to give him a big bonus because Trev had to get him out of here 2 weeks too early, so he's got another couple million bucks. So in my mind, Trev Alberts insulted everybody that's ever gone to a game, paid for a ticket, given donation to Nebraska, or done anything by giving away money to a guy that didn't deserve it. And the reason he didn't deserve it is because, he had an opportunity. He can't recruit. Not only could he not recruit, he couldn't evaluate players. When Adrian Martinez come in, he was a pretty good player. I remember the first time I watched him play against Colorado, he looked pretty good. And I thought, wow, this guy's going to be pretty good. And in the next 4 or 5 years, he never improved. And not only did he not improve, Scott Frost had an opportunity to bring somebody in from Ohio State who had played Big Ten football, who was a pretty decent quarterback, who was begging to come to the state of Nebraska and play because his father and his 2 brothers had played for Nebraska. And it was always his dream to play for Nebraska. And of course, Nebraska was too smart, really too dumb, to recruit him out of high school. And also after he went through school and was had 1 extra year to go, he could have been recruited by Nebraska, wanted to come to Nebraska, talked to Scott Frost. Scott Frost said, well, I don't think so. We've got good enough talent here now. And of course, you all know who I'm talking about, Joe Burrow, who went on to LSU and won a national championship. So Scott Frost not only couldn't recruit, he couldn't even recognize talent when he saw it. If he would have brought Joe Burrow in that second year, and that would have been a help for Martinez, even though he wouldn't have done as well as he did at LSU because he didn't have the receivers, but still, he would have done much better than a freshman, sophomore quarterback that had no experience coming right into a Big Ten conference, of which Scott Frost could never figure out. So, Frost's problem has been recruiting, and that's the problem we have today. The offensive, defensive line, it comes down to one drive. Wisconsin drives it down to the field. They get down to the goal line, and then they quarterback sneak it over the goal line. They blow Nebraska line back 5 yards and walk right into the end zone, just like Michigan did last week. So that's the problem. It's not Micky Joseph. It's recruiting. And of course, Micky Joseph has the solution for this, and that is to recruit better. And he said he has a plan. He has a game plan for how to do this. And he's the guy to do it better than anybody. I made a video last week about Deion Sanders. I think Deion wouldn't be as good as Micky. I think Deion's a little bit more about Deion, and Micky's a little bit more about Nebraska. So I think that if Trev Alberts doesn't pick Micky Joseph as the next coach, I think Nebraska's in for, they might as well drop down to Division II, or they might as well just quit doing football, because it's going to get ugly. They got to get the correct coach. And everybody's talking about this guy named Matt Rule. The guy he was from Temple, Baylor, and then got fired from Carolina. Like, that's a resume you can be proud of. Like, wow, we're really be happy to get a guy that did Temple, Baylor, and Panthers. I mean, we had a guy who just got through going to a Super Bowl that couldn't come in and make it, and Bill Callahan. What makes you think that this guy, Matt Rule, can do any better or do as well? And I just look at Matt Rule, and he doesn't look like the personality that can go in and recruit kids from states like Texas or, California or Louisiana. You need a player and a coach that can come in and get players and bring them in. I think Micky can do that. Micky's a perfect person for this, because Micky was in Louisiana and he got recruited by Tom Osborne, so he knows what it's like. The problem with recruiting Nebraska isn't the weather and it isn't Lincoln. It's the fact that it's a long way from everything else. I mean, so if you're living in Lincoln, you're a long way from the West Coast, you're a long way from Louisiana, you're a long way from Texas and the East Coast. So that first year when a player gets to campus in Lincoln, it's not the weather, it's not the town, it's not anything else. Lincoln's no different than any place else to live. And of course, I've lived both places. I'm in California now. I've lived in Nebraska, all over Nebraska, East Coast, West Coast. Lived in Lincoln and lived in Omaha for a few years. So it's not, you get acclimated to the weather. And of course, there's always things to do. What's wrong with being recruited to Lincoln is the fact that you were a long way from home. So that first year, when you're away from friends and family, someone's got to be interacting with you. Someone's got to be talking to you. Someone's got to be asking you how you're doing. That's Micky Joseph. That wasn't Scott Frost. That's not going to be Matt Rule. That's not going to be some other $5-10 million a year coach that they bring in that's going to sit down and really, get involved with these kids and make sure they stay and get them to come to Lincoln. And if you can show, like a guy like Trey Palmer, who comes from Louisiana, comes to Lincoln and gets successful, under Micky Joseph, gets, going to the pros, you can show that pipeline, you can show that to the new recruits. That's what's going to get him to come. And a guy like Micky Joseph can do that. And he understands that. And he's the reason for it. And it's not coaching. And I can give you an example of that. Look at Whipple. I mean, Whipple was at Pittsburgh last year. He had a great quarterback, Heisman candidate. He had a great receiver, and Pittsburgh was doing very well. I think they won over 11 games. Now he comes to Nebraska and everybody's ready to run him out of town. Well, Whipple didn't get dumb all of a sudden. What happened is he's just got a different team, a different set of players. So it's all about the players. It's about the people you recruit. The best person to recruit right now is Micky Joseph, because he's been through it. He's gone from Louisiana to Nebraska, had to spend the first year away from his family and friends. He understands the transition, and he's the kind of guy that can connect with the players, unlike somebody like Scott Frost. So if they don't hire Micky Joseph, I think I'm going to be pretty much over Nebraska football, because I just don't see a way out of this. And I thought the first video I made, I was pretty sure that they'd already hired Micky, and he was just carrying on because, they had to announce it because he wanted to take some time to, obviously check out other coaches. But I think, after hearing Micky last week, I pretty much think that he may not be the head coach. And don't think he's going to stick around if he isn't head coach, because he's at an age that if he's going to be head coach, he better do it now. And he's way too valuable. Somebody's going to offer him a head coach position if he doesn't get hired in Nebraska. And this idea of having the best of both worlds there, we're going to get Joseph and then another coach on top of that just doesn't play out logically. Joseph will be gone if they hire another coach. And if they bring a second coach in, and Micky's still around, that's not going to work for the new coach. Because if you pay a coach $10 million a year, $5 million a year, and then you give him conditions like, well, you can come to be Nebraska's coach, but you got to bring Bill Bush along, because he's a great defensive coach, and you got to take on Micky Joseph, and because he's great with players and everybody loves him. So that coach is going to feel threatened by those conditions. And the first thing the coach is going to say, I want to bring in my people, because I don't want to have the competition of having people say every time I do something, second guess me and say, we want Micky Joseph, because Micky Joseph would have been better. So the new coach is always going to feel like he's being compared to Micky Joseph. And of course, Micky Joseph's always going to feel like, hey, I'm the one that brought Trey Palmer up. I'm the one that brought Casey Thompson in. I'm the one that did all this stuff. And now somebody else is going to try, take the credit for it. I don't think it's going to be a good working relationship. It's going to be more disastrous. So please, Trev Alberts, hire Micky Joseph. Do it right now. Right now you got a game this week in Wisconsin that if you didn't, most people say you don't want to really tell the other team who you're going to start at quarterback. Well, they had to tell them that Casey Thompson was going to play, because if they didn't tell them Casey Thompson was going to play, I don't think anybody would want to watch the game today. So, you know, you have to tell Casey Thompson it's going to play, or, you know, it's getting to the point they're not going to have the sellouts and nobody's going to watch the games if Casey doesn't play. The other thing I was going to talk a little bit about last week's game with Michigan. I was going to make a video, but I forgot to make a video. The first thing is, on the very first series, Purdy runs out of bounds, but he's really mad at the running back, Grant. And he starts kind of interacting with him, kind of really upset with him. So I was wondering what was going on there. The second thing with that game was that, you know, he slid. And you saw today that there was a targeting thing with somebody trying to tackle Micky Joseph and got targeted. So Trevor Purdy slid. He slid awkwardly, and of course he tore up his ankle, and he said, "I have surgery." So these guys that are sliding, this is really a bad decision in my opinion. It doesn't turn out well. Either you get hit awkwardly and hurt, or you do what Trevor Purdy does. You slide in a way that you mess up your, you tear up a knee or tear up an ankle, and that's what happened to him. So that was, too bad. I think they could tell these kids to quit trying to slide. Sliding is just a bad idea. Just run for the out of bounds if you don't feel like you want to take the hit. But don't slide. Sliding just ends up causing, either an injury, or it ends up causing, somebody, some problems. It usually ends up bad. So the fact that he slid in that game was really kind of a bad idea. I think that was terrible that he slid, because that messed up his season. Now he has to be out for the rest of the season. So anyway, they haven't come up with anybody yet that I think is got a good solution for Nebraska football, and it certainly isn't. I think the guy, and who knows who Trev Albert's actually considering. These are the names being thrown around, but I haven't heard anybody yet that's any good. And anybody yet that would do any good for Nebraska except for Micky Joseph. So gosh, please hire Micky Joseph and do it now. This is the guy that can fix the program. And everybody likes him. And I think that, like when I made my first video, I think 3,000 people watched it. And everybody, pretty much was in agreement that Micky should be the coach. So please hire Micky Joseph. Do it now, because if you don't do it now, you lose the opportunity. And right now, the opportunity that they can't miss out on is the coaching thing with Micky Joseph. So they got to do it now. I appreciate you watching.